Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today, we're going to be setting up the week's worth of weekly meta breakdowns where we look at the best performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. I got a number of comments from folks asking historic when, historic when, historic when. Well, here's your historic best of one. We don't have enough data for best of three yet, in part because we both got a new alchemy set and there were some nerfs to the Discover combo with Geological Appraiser as well as Fragment Reality to stop the Geist deck, which thankfully, as we're seeing on the screen, is shaking up the meta a bit. We're getting a couple new decks. So this is Historic Best of One. We'll come back with the standard, timeless, all that jazz. The weekend was kind of focused on metagame challenges. So I think for like the month of March, we're going to be focusing like the best of three content for the metagames that are coming up. And then we'll cover some best of ones. We'll try to do like the meta breakdowns as well, kind of leading up to that. But for each of the metagame challenges, you'll see with standard, I did a deep dive, like 14 decks. And as much as possible, I'll kind of put out some gameplay, stuff like that. For the standard one, we have 3-hour gameplay from the runs that we did, trying out a bunch of decks as well, so that's up on the YouTube. But as always, we get the data from UntapGG, what you see on the screen, companion tool that tracks your win rate, aggregates with other users, gives us ladder stats. So it's kind of a look in terms of like what people are playing and what's doing well. We're going to start with popularity of the day, and then we'll look at win rates themselves. One thing to kind of mention, as always, if you haven't subbed to the channel, we have a tracker at the top. We're trying to hit 15,000 subs by June. We're a couple shy, 35 away from 12,000 on the channel. So hit that sub button, free, easy. We come out with a whole bunch of useful stats, deck ideas, stuff like that to give you the competitive edge when you're kind of taking to the ladder or events itself. But otherwise, like, comments, it helps out as well. So we're going to jump into it. Popularity of the day, we see Izzet Wizards reclaim its crown as the most played deck in the format, and it kind of got a new card, a new bolt effect from the new alchemy drop. Mono black midrange is at 10%. This deck was kind of like a one ring edict style deck that was preying on the Geist deck. It's fallen off a lot in terms of win rate. We could see for the day it's like 47%, and when I looked at the stats, it's like sub 50%. So we're not going to feature that today, but it's about 10%. Mono green devotion at 9%. Ninjas, which I think is the best deck of the format. The stats will agree with the, but it's a harder deck to play just in terms of sequencing, but 7%. Elves, 6.6, Azorius Control, 6.4, but I always feel like I run into Control more than anything. We got some aggro at 5.8, and then Dimir Mill at 4.5. If we're looking at kind of the trends, can I pull up Asa? Because it got nerfed out. I wanted to see the Geist deck because like in Timeless, for example, in Diamond rank, the first week of March, it was at 80% popularity, which is kind of wild. But we see a decline of the leyline. Oh, actually, it's right here, 4-color leyline. So we saw it upwards of 25%, and now it's just kind of gone from existence to my chagrin. We see the Wizards deck be as low as like 7.5, come up to 20, and then everything else kind of jumbled up in terms of percentage. But we're going to start off 27,000 games of best of one played from March 5th through the 10th. We put the cap low just to try to get some diversity. I will say, like, historic, there's some folks that are very proficient with decks and tend to do, like, I know like the first deck we're going to cover is Ninjas. One dude's like number one, like on and off mythic, playing just nothing but ninjas, plays a lot of games with it, and I think that's kind of correlated to their win rate. Similarly, there's like a player like in best of three Capella, plays a lot of Yogg, crazy win rate with it. They actually went 52-0 in best of three at one point on a streak, which was nuts. But then the Yogg deck in best of one has a 47% win rate. So sometimes it's just certain players jive with decks very well. But speaking of which, Dimir Ninjas, 120 games, 82.5% win rate. So the biggest kind of change with the ban or restriction or nerf, whatever you want to call the hurling the leyline deck into the core of the sun, was they were playing 4 Sheoldred's Edict. You don't need the Edict now, so you can play Bitter Triumph, which is more flexible, direct target, as well as a couple copies of Cut Down in place. But the core of this deck is both a Retrofitter Foundry deck that you can leverage Changeling Outcast, Ornithopter, the Foundry, but then also like through the Ninja effects, kind of ninjutsu things in. There's a bunch of alchemy buffs to this set that make the cards more powerful, just reducing like ninjutsu costs, stuff like that. But if you have enough mana, there's kind of an instance where you could kind of keep ninjaing back to Thousand Face Shadows back and forth to your hand with the Silver Fur Master out, since it reduces the ninjutsu cost. And then you just keep making copies of Silver Fur. And then you just kind of get stackable lords that kind of power out. But it's a tempo-y style. You have Spell Pierce, which are really powerful, a bunch of removal. And then it takes some reps, I would say, to just get proficient with the deck. I do have a video, like the gameplay doesn't change much, but if you want to see the deck in action, there's a video on my channel. In the first game, we do the quote-unquote combo. People hate when I use the word combo, but a combination of cards which interact in a synergy-based manner. And you can kind of see it in action there. This is Lurrus Companion as well. This is a very strong deck. Once you get proficient with it, you can win a lot of games with it. Next up is Azorius Control, 79%. So Control's got a couple different flavors, but the biggest thing is you likely don't need Blessed Alliance anymore. So this was Azorius's 2-mana answer to the Geist, since it forces your opponent to sack a creature. It could be reasonable, but it's mostly just going to be like 4 mana kind of removal, also gain life. You can probably just play like March of Otherworldly Light, stuff like that instead. Just have more targeted removal in the place. This version here is leveraging One Ring, Union of the Third Path to buy you a bunch of time. You have Divine Purge, you have White Sun's Twilight, Supreme Verdict, and Farewell of Sweepers. This deck's still playing Fragment. It's still a useful removal spell. I still think it's good in that regard. It's just reworded to now only hit opponent stuff, so you don't get the shenanigans of target your ley line. Snapcasters, kind of tempo elements. We're seeing No More Lies getting featured in the deck. This version's a little bit lighter on Dovin's Veto. You sometimes see higher numbers of that. It does help in the control mirror. But this version here is also pretty light on Planeswalkers, leveraging like Kalim and stuff like that. So a little bit more proactive. You have the Shark Typhoon, you have the White Sun's Twilight as kind of win conditions, a couple of the Hall the Storm Giants. You can probably, instead of the Seachrome Coast, play a couple of the new Surveil lands. We've seen some copies of those get played through various formats. While you don't have the fetches, it still provides some utility in that respect in terms of just being able to set up your early draws to kind of hit key cards. From there, we go to Boros Convoke, 71.4%. So this version here, we have Esper Sentinel, we have both the Gleeful Demolition, but in Historic, we also have Godoltha Rebirth. So another way to kind of get tokens onto the battlefield. We have the 12 1-mana make an artifact token kind of effects. Case of the Gateway Express is in here as well. Pride of Conquerors in here that gives you a whole like a boost to your team. Regal Bunnycorn goes big. Regal Conclave Tribunal as removal. I think you're probably gonna want like 4 copies of Knight Errant in here. It just gets you more action, and it's very easy to kind of go wide with it. The best draws are like turn 1, something that makes an artifact, turn 2, play this, and then Knight Errant. The card that you might want to look to see if you can fit it within the mana base is the new Amara. It's the alchemy 3-drop that itself has Convoke, and then when it enters the battlefield, you get to draft from its spellbook another card that's kind of got that Convoke theme. So you pretty much can get like Conclave Tribunal, Venerated Loxodon, Knight Errant of Eos. You can get all these like powerful Convoke cards self-contained with it. Most of the time, it's like free to cast with the deck. So it's a card that finds another card for free kind of value. I love the Boros mana base in this format. It's like so many good untapped lands compared to standard. From there, we go to Mono Green Devotion, 67%. Nothing really tech-wise. It's kind of just tried and true. One thing you might want to start looking at is the Mono Green Charm. In part because it provides you with a way to tutor up Nykthos. It can be a fight spell, it can blow up artifacts or enchantments. So it's got a bunch of utility on the card itself. We've seen it be played in some formats. The Polukranos is reasonable in the best of 1 format because you're going to see a higher density of wizards, and this helps you kind of block the early turns as early as turn 2. I think fewer copies of Wolf Willow. In this format, you can play Elves because there's no Bowmaster, or there's Nerf Bowmaster, but kind of plays to that. Because you're in best of 1, you get access to a Karn board. You have Graveyard Hate, kind of combo hate, like extra mana. Notably, this does turn off your own Nykthos, so just be mindful of that. You can shut off activated abilities with a Carno. You can blow up lands. God Pharaoh's a tax effect. Platinum Angel against certain decks, they just can't win. Cityscape Leveler as a blow up effect, and Portal to Phyrexia. One card you might want to consider is a Chroma's Memorial. Memorial actually kind of wins you the game in your combo. Again, combo. But when you're popping off with Kiora, Storm the Festival, stuff like that, say you get like 4 creatures into play, you generate a whole bunch of mana. If you get a Chroma's Memorial, it gives all your creatures haste, so you can play for the turn and attack that turn. So you don't have to like do all this stuff, and then your blue-white control player is like, okay, I Supreme Verdict you, cool. So that's something to consider. You might also want Wormcoil Engine in here, as well as the Might, the 1 mana blow-up artifact or enchantment kind of effect in there. Then move on to the most played deck, Izzet Wizards, 66.6, Mark of the Devil. So the biggest kind of inclusion that we get this week is Shove Aside. So 1 mana sorcery deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalkers. So it's Strangle, but if you aren't the starting player, then you can cast as those flash. So then it's basically Lightning Bolt that doesn't target your opponent's face. We're also seeing some copies of Spell Pierce for disruption. And then the full set of Flame of Anoran here. And then kind of your traditional wizard package. 20 lands is a reasonable amount to kind of grind out those games. But you're basically just like Symmetry Sage is a house, powers up your team. Just a lot of pressure this deck can put on at instant speed. It allows you to interact, just burst damage out of nowhere, thanks to the Reckless Charges. It's a very fun deck. It's also like, if you have the mana base, it's really not too heavy in terms of rare wild cards. Like 4, 8, 12 for the main board minus mana, which is a mana base is super helpful, like through a variety of different formats. Now, the next one, I don't know how this is getting this win rate, but somebody brought Nazguls. They brought 9 of them. See, the thing is, it's going to pace this deck list. It's all going to be the same code. You need to add 1 of each variant. That's the key, but very kind of strange deck. I wouldn't suggest crafting this if you want to play it, if you have it. This is probably something where they either have like a low MMR. A lot of these cards aren't playable, but Nazgul's wondering, like Golem Patient Plotter is not really a playable card. You should be playing Fatal Pushes. Like Infernal Grasp is like the 8th best version of this effect at this point. Play Fatal Pushes or stuff like that. You could play something like Thought Seizes kind of mixed into there, but you got Nazguls. Every time the ring tempts you, they get bigger, kind of attack in that regard. Witch King of Angmar, 5 mana. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage. Whenever 1 or more creatures deal combat damage to you, each opponent sacrifices that creature that dealt damage to you, and the ring tempts you. Discard a card, gains indestructible. So a 5 mana creature that dies to all the 1 mana removal of wizards does not seem like a place you want to be, but who am I to tell you don't play your Lord of the Rings deck? Rings Wraiths, Invoke Despairs, Barad-dûrs in here. It's missing the 1 ring, Flavor Fail. Again, if you have the cards, you want to play this. Disclaimer, don't craft this deck. I don't think it's good. But people love Nazguls. They love this kind of Lord of the Rings themed deck, so it's here if you're interested. But don't go out of your way to craft these. You're going to be upset if you spend a lot of wild cards on it. Mono red aggro. So this is an interesting one. We see some of the popper decks leverage things like Implementation of Combustion, Misha's Research Desk, the kind of synthesizer package. So it's a very low mana count. It's a budgety deck, so this actually doesn't have any rares in it. You can kind of boost it up a bit by playing something like Den of the Bugbear in this mana base, just to make it a little bit better. Play 2 of them. Otherwise, like you're not terribly out of place with some of these cards. The kind of core of it is you're paying cheap artifacts. The Goblin Rune Blaster gets bigger whenever you sacrifice another permanent. That could be blood tokens. That can be any of these like cheapo artifacts. And then you have things like Improvised Club, Shrapnel Blast that deal 4 to 5 damage for 2 mana when you sack into these artifacts. These artifacts getting sacked also provide you utility in terms of card advantage or stuff like that. Skewers in here, Light Up Stage. So it's actually got quite a bit of embedded card advantage in it, which is always nice for these kind of low to the ground aggro decks. Like this deck would love Bobble as well, and from like Timeless. You might want to try out Dragon Rage Chandler. There's a lot of ways in this deck to cheaply enable Delirium. Like the artifacts kind of help in that respect. You might also want to try out something like Bomat Courier is another thing that kind of refills your hand, is the artifact, so it kind of plays into that theme. I don't think this is that great. Even though its power gets really big, it's 2 toughness, it gets chunked by a lot of stuff, and kind of like it kind of trade up, but at the same time, like I think DRC, Dragon Rage Chandler having flying is a lot more utility, or Bomat Courier refilling your hand. From there, we go to Esper Ensoul. So this is another kind of artifact aggro themed deck. We've seen variations of this. So it's kind of the core of Retrofitter Foundry, the Ornithopters, a bunch of cheap artifacts, and then you have things like All That Glitters and Soul Artifact to boost up the power. You can throw that onto Darksteel Citadel. The Vault Scourge is really a 1 mana play in this deck. You just pay the 2 life. The innovative meta tech helps you seek more card advantage, and then you could like Mashiko's out a whole bunch of power with the deck itself. This version's also got the Razor Ties Bridge as a way to have another indestructible land. The Deserted Beach should be fast lands. These are too slow for this type of deck. You don't want to tap land on turn 1 or 2, so this should be Seachrome Coast, I would say. Get your guys' blessings. We're playing Mill, boys and girls. So Mill, Rune Crabs, Mesmeric Orbs. We have Manic Scribe that enters a battlefield, and then Mills, and then Delirium mills some more. Drown in the Lock with such amazing art, but you have to craft it as a mythic because of the thing. Like I would switch all. This is such good art, and it's ridiculous that it's kind of paywalled behind mythics. Foundings to kind of rebuy, glimpse kind of value. You have Fraying Sanity that just doubles up on Mill. Honestly, this is probably something where you want 4 Tashas. It's just such a good card, especially against a lot of these low CMC decks. Also playing Startled Awake, target player mills 13. Then you can put it from the graveyard onto the battlefield transformed, activate as a sorcery. When it deals combat damage, to return it to its hand. So it's a way, kind of a recurable way. Even if you mill it over with your Mesmeric Orb, you get some value there. One thing you might want to try out in this deck is something like Cling to Dust. Provides you another way. You can mill over it, gets you some life, eats away at your opponent's graveyard as well. But like Jace takes out huge chunks of their graveyard as well. And then lastly, some folks just showed up with their Pioneer deck. They went to their LGS. We're like, we're here for FNM. Let's play some Pioneer. And they're like, this is historic. They're like, oh, well, but 54% reasonable if you have the deck there. But I've tried it out in Timeless as well. It's pretty fun. Timeless, you get Dark Ritual, so you can turn 1 the combo. But Sorin cheating into Vein Ripper is kind of the goal. You could try out things like Bloodghast in place of the Dusk Legion Zealot is another way. Since it's a vampire, it's recursive, kind of gets value in that respect. But otherwise, it's like a Rakdos mid-range deck, which we've seen some variations of. Smuggler's Copter provides some nice value to draw a discard to help you find combo pieces. And then Cavernous Souls is nice against the more control decks to just cheat into play stuff. They can't counter, so you get some value on all your vampires. That's it for the week. We'll hopefully build up some more data. I think there's a return to like goblins and stuff like that in Best of 1 too. We're just not seeing it. But largely, like goblins, other than Cavernous Souls, probably didn't get any new tech recently. So you can kind of play the same deck. The thing, I was trying Esper Greasefang. I started like 7-0 and then lost 4 in a row. The Diviner is really nice. Without the Bowmasters, you get a lot of value there with Smuggler's Copter in Diviner. So you're playing like an Esper midrange deck. That's up on my YouTube. We tried out the Madness deck, the Mono Red Madness deck. That got #1 Mythic in Best of 3. Tried it in Best of 1. It was a little rougher in Best of 1. When I was talking to the creator of the deck, he said he built it more with the Best of 3 in mind. So that's one thing to consider. But if you're looking for Best of 3, that deck had like a 70+% win rate. The video is up on my YouTube as well. Okay, it's going to wrap this up. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you next time.